Could everyone please take your seats? We'd like to get started on time, so if you go ahead and take your seat. There's still a few seats near the front. I'd like to welcome everyone to St. Thomas Episcopal Church and to this event sponsored by the Appalachian Peace Education Center. We'd like to thank Eleanor and Bucky for all the work organizing the event. And again, we very much want to welcome Senator Tim Kaine and are very, very happy to have him here with us this afternoon. So we'd like to start out with a little prayer, seeing as this is a house of worship, and it should come up on the screen. We'd like to pray together. How about that? The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Let us pray. O Holy One, we come to this place with heavy hearts. We pray for understanding, and we give thanks for this beautiful house of worship. We know that many in Palestine have only shards and stones left of their own. As we give thanks for our comfortable homes, we know that hope is all that remains for thousands in Palestine. As we cherish the time with our children and grandchildren, we know that today parents hold their children in shrouds to hide death. As we give thanks that we may speak directly to leaders in our government, we see that people in other countries are killed for speaking out. We pray for understanding to help each other find ways to speak that bring peace, that make clear to our neighbors that bombs do not buy security, that killing only diminishes our children's future.
Amen.
Amen.
That's on. All right, wow. Thank you all so much for being here in the middle of the afternoon on a Friday. I'd like to take a moment to recognize those of our members that can't be here, especially our Muslim brothers and sisters who are currently in Friday prayer, and everyone that couldn't afford to miss the work. We only have 45 minutes. Thank you for being here, Senator. I know that we only have 45 minutes, and we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to say as much as possible. So make sure to get an index card from Kathy and Dandy at the doors. We'll be gathering that and making sure it gets its way to the senator. So we already heard a little bit from Reverend Boyd. Reverend Boyd is the priest here at St. Thomas, but he also served congregations in Palestine in 2015, in 2016, last fall, and he recently visited his congregations this past spring. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. So I'd just like to share a little bit of my experience with you. Again, I served primarily in Ramallah. Father Fadi Diab's the rector there in Ramallah. He's third or fourth generation Palestinian Christian there in Ramallah. They have a pretty thriving congregation. While I was there, I did quite a bit of youth ministry, and this is the children in Zababdi in the West Bank, and a very thriving Christian community throughout Palestine, the West Bank, and also even in Gaza. In 2016, I had the opportunity to travel to Gaza, as the Episcopal Church has a hospital there in Gaza, the Al-Ahli Hospital. It's a specialty hospital, mostly for diagnostics. Interestingly, it's led by a Christian woman. The woman at the end of the table there, Sahela, runs the hospital. And again, it's prior to the war, it was mostly women's health diagnostics. They've had to try to convert it to trauma care with the recent conflict. The group that I went with was mostly women, and me and a medical doctor. We did have a Jewish woman with us as we traveled into Gaza, so some of these things might be surprising. Entered from the Israel side, the Erez crossing. But we noticed even in 2016, there was quite a bit of devastation and destruction. This is a kindergarten, daycare center that we toured that had been recently been bombed and strafed there in northern Gaza. The conditions in Gaza when I was there were pretty primitive, mix of cars and certainly not first world conditions, somewhere between second and third world when I was there. But the bomb destruction was pretty evident there in Gaza. And they had this macabre term for the routine bombing of Gaza called mowing the grass. And even its 2001 article from Washington Post talks about Israel mowing the grass there in Gaza. And just a little chart I found about the human cost of the conflict. Between 2008 and 2020, there were almost 2,600 Palestinians killed, many of those in Gaza as well, 251 Israelis during the same time period. But it's interesting that I was there in the West Bank in the fall of 2023, and things just seemed untenable when I was there. This settler violence was really out of control. The settlers are allowed to have arms, the Palestinian civilians are not, and they were just really wreaking havoc, taking land and killing people there in the West Bank. But back to interestingly, the year leading up to October 7th was pretty well the deadliest 2 years for Palestinians in 2 decades. Is something that we should always remember. While not condoning what happened on October 7th, it certainly didn't happen in a vacuum. But back to Gaza, I do a lot of youth ministry, visited a kindergarten there. They're having kindergarten graduation when I was there, and the beautiful, beautiful children there. And then the boys came in to join, processed in to join the graduation. Visited another school, the Katan Center for the Child there. And it was, in my experience, in all of the youth ministry and schools I've been in Palestine, the teachers were working very hard to create a very loving and joyful environment. And I never experienced anyone teaching a child to hate anybody during my time in Gaza or in Palestine. And our group was very warmly received in Gaza. Over and over again, we heard, "Welcome to Gaza," and "We're so glad you're here." And so it was a very, very positive experience for me. But we did have a chance to visit the Al-Shadi refugee camp, also known as the beach camp. It's there on the beach. And as we walked through this, I made friends with this little girl in the blue dress, and she just, our eyes sort of locked, and her expression sort of said to me, "Will you help me?" It wasn't too many moments later that her family joined her there, and I've wondered quite a bit about this little girl and her fate with the current bombing situation. I did a little Googling and found a photo of the Al-Shadi camp from May of 2023. This is the Al-Shadi camp area, May of 2023, and this is 2 weeks after October 7th. October 21st, you can see it's pretty well flattened. And this is a photo around that intersection where I took that photo of that little girl. In recent news, there's been mass graves found at Gaza hospitals that indicate that people have possibly that were found in the hospitals were executed. They were found buried in mass graves with their hands tied, stripped of their clothes. 390 bodies found at 3 mass grave sites. If I'm not mistaken, a 4th was found in the last few weeks. A doctor from the orthopedic surgeon from one of the doctors recently, one of the things Israel did was they took all the doctors prisoner, especially at our hospital. This doctor died in prison, and this is the time of Israel. It's reported that he was assassinated. A fellow hostage or said that he had been tortured and killed in the hospital. So just to summarize what's happened so far, there's been almost 35,000 Palestinians killed, many using U.S. supplied weapons. At least 31 children have died of starvation so far. About 78,000 injured, 143 journalists and media workers have been killed, over 300 healthcare workers, 145 UN staff, 122 ambulances hit, and 80,000 housing units destroyed completely. And that's my time. I could go on for a long time.
Thank you for your time, Reverend. I know that there's so much to cover.
There's so much to cover.
So little time. I hope that we will have opportunities to continue this conversation after today. Our next speaker is Mohammed Nasser, and he's going to be speaking as a member of the Muslim community here locally.
Thank you very much for inviting and giving the opportunity to the Muslim of Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia to speak today. We are very grateful to the members of APEC and all the people in this gathering today, and we extend warm wishes to all of you. My name is Mohammed Nasser, and I'm a software engineer by profession. I'm speaking on behalf of the Nofel family in Knoxville, whose 60 family members have been killed during this genocide. I'm speaking on behalf of Sakala family, whose 28 family members have been killed. I'm speaking on behalf of Faraula family, whose 22 family members have been killed. I'm speaking on behalf of Baba family, whose 15 family members have been killed. And I'm speaking on behalf of Faisal Khatib, who lives in Johnson City, and his cousin was killed in the West Bank. I'm speaking on behalf of the Muslim community, who is grieving for the loss of human lives, irrespective of the color of their skin, social status, or their religion. On behalf of the Muslim community of the whole United States, we request you, Senator Kaine, to use your influence as a United States Senator to bring an end to this unjust killing of human beings in Gaza. Since October 7th, more than 1 million Palestinians were displaced from their homes, and an average of 150 Palestinians is being killed each day. Nearly 30 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza have been bombarded, some of them repeatedly, even while medical staff, patients, and civilians were taking shelters in them. Those Palestinians who have been displaced from their homes are in a miserable situation. They are without basic necessity of life, including food, water, electricity, and medical supplies. Not as American Muslims, but as human beings, we demand the United States to play its role and bring an end to this massacre. We advocate for an immediate ceasefire and bring an end to this cycle of violence, oppression, and carnage. For one cannot work towards peace when people are being killed unjustly. Without an immediate ceasefire, the dream of a just and equitable settlement between the Palestinians and Israelis cannot even begin to take a shape. America should work towards bringing an end to this genocide. We also demand that our tax dollar should be used to stamp out starvation and lift people out of poverty instead of providing billions of dollars in the aid and weapons to Israel. Those weapons that are being used to kill civilians unjustly as human beings. It's our collective responsibility, regardless of which faith we follow, to raise our voices and play our part in stopping this massacre and preventing the loss of precious human lives. And here, I quote from a speech said by Malcolm X in Cairo, 1965, which is almost 60 years ago, which is still, ironically enough, applied till today. And here I start. Let us unite in building a world where every soul can live in freedom and dignity, where the rights of every individual are not just respected, but celebrated. The struggle for justice in Palestine is a universal fight, a resonating echo of the battles waged by oppressed people across the globe. It is a battle we must champion, a torch we must carry, and a legacy we must honor. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Mohammed. Our next speaker is Yogev von Kundra. He is a local Jewish farmer and a board member of APEC. Thank you, Yogev.
Thank you for meeting with us, Senator Kaine. So I'm here to support APEC's Path to Peace. Also a farmer, I'm a member of the Jewish Farmers Network and a member of the Jewish Voices for Peace. We're headed up to DC in a few weeks. We're going to be meeting with all members of Congress to try to raise the Jewish voices calling for a change in U.S. policy. And I'm going to try to put my message simply. I appreciated the Malcolm X quote. I'm going to give an MLK quote that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And the horrific events of October 7th, terrorist attacks to respond by genocide is just violence to try to drive out violence. And instead we need peace. So we're trying to end that cycle of violence. I have a gift for you. So this is a watercolor that was painted by a Jew that was hiding during the Holocaust. And to me, what I see, it's just a beautiful little structure and a little plot of land. And I think to any Jew hiding during the Holocaust, to any refugee anywhere in the world, for the millions of Palestinians, this within this frame is an entire life of hopes and dreams. And that's what everybody deserves. And I want to share my great-grandmother composed this song written to the piano called Israeli Lullaby. And I've written those words on the back of this. And she used to talk to my dad when he was a boy about what Israel meant to Jews. That a people that for thousands of years through displacement and refugees scattered throughout the entire world, that having a home where there's no more Jewish refugees, that was so important to my family. And to displace another population and to create more refugees is not the solution. And so I'm standing with a lot of Jews throughout the United States calling for change, a lot of Israelis that are protesting this war, that as long as we don't have justice in Palestine, we will never have peace in Israel. And I just want to share the last few verses of this song that says, but there will come another day when peace will rule this land, and there will be another boy to play upon that sand. So go to sleep and have no fear, for you are safe tonight. I want to share the words of Chuck Schumer, who said, we should not let the complexities of this conflict stop us from stating the plain truth. Palestinian civilians do not deserve to suffer for the sins of Hamas, and Israel has a moral obligation to do better. The United States has an obligation to do better. If you look at a lot of it's not just the 10 Commandments, the Christian faith, but it's, the Jewish covenant to God made on Mount Sinai, to thou shalt not kill, to love our neighbor. It's in our moral code. And also it's within Israel's best interest to have peace in Palestine, then we can have peace in Israel as well. And so when I give you this, I'm not just giving you all my hopes and dreams, but I'm giving you the hope of my great-grandmother for peace. And for the sake of our children and our children's children, we need you to be the leader worthy of our dreams and worthy of our hope for peace.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yogev. I know that you capture a lot of feelings that are shared by many of us here, and Peter Locke has a gift for the senator to speak to this as well.
Senator, I also have a gift for you. It is over 300 signatures on a petition supporting a ceasefire in Palestine and an end to U.S. military aid to Israel. And although these these marks on a piece of paper might seem insignificant, they are not. It is the voice of the people. It is the voice of our friends and our family and our fellow citizens. It is anything but insignificant. It is a voice spoken with passion and resolve. And it is my sincere hope that you heed that voice.
Peter. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Our next speaker is Peggy Matthews from the local Scott County Democratic Committee.
Thank you, Senator Kaine, for taking this time to meet with us and hear our concerns. I believe you join us in advocating for a peaceful end to this horrific war and for immediate and substantial humanitarian aid in Gaza. It's from this common ground that I speak to you now. I am a proud Democrat, and I am a proud member of the Scott County Democratic Committee. I'm a district chair, and I serve on the executive committee. But I'm having a very difficult time this year squaring what my party stands for: human rights, human dignity, self-determination of a people, with what this Democratic administration is doing to abet the continued killing of innocent people living in Gaza. I'm deeply concerned that the Democratic Party is losing the youth vote because of Biden's continued support of this war. And come November, we will lose the presidency and the Senate as a result. Over the past few months, I've spoken with many young people who are passionate about stopping the atrocities that are taking place in Gaza. And they tell me with great conviction that they will not vote for the president. In fact, there are people here in this room, who have that position. And it scares me to death that Donald Trump will be our next president. Senator Kaine, it is absolutely critical that the president take action now to turn this trend around. So I'm asking you, what can we do? What do you need us to do that will help you influence the president to take a stand against this horrible war and push for a ceasefire and a peaceful solution. I hope we can have that conversation at the end. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, Peggy, and Bucky Boone, our chair of the APEC board, will speak next.
Senator Kaine, I've been asked to explain what we need from you as our senator. But before I begin, I want to clearly state we do, and I've heard other speakers say this, we do not view the Jewish people or the Muslim people or the Christian people as our enemy. We do not view any people as our enemy. Our true enemy and the enemy of our future is the easy notion that violence and killing are okay if they get you what you want, be it revenge, security, power, or land. I feel like we are in the midst of a terrible epidemic of addiction, an addiction to violence and militarism, and our government is the most addicted of all. We spend more on the military than the next 10 governments combined. I know you know that. This doesn't make us safer, only bloated with military power. There seems to be common aspects of different epidemics of addiction. One is that someone always gets rich. In our opioid epidemic in Southwest Virginia, it was the Sacklers and the pharmacies. With our militarism addiction, it is the military contractors. Last year, the government gave Lockheed Martin over $67 billion. And the only real requirement Israel has that I understand for all the military boondoggle that we give them is to spend it with American military contractors. Another common aspect is self-delusion. For our epidemic in Southwest Virginia, the Sacklers saturated our communities with millions of pills. Then their representatives came to our region to express sorrow that we had a problem with addiction. They even offered, I think it was $1 million to help us deal with our problem. It is obvious today that the Sacklers did not care for our communities, only their profits. Today, we have a president and at least some in Congress who expressed dismay that the Israeli government has succumbed to the madness of military destruction, and even offered to build a pier to help the victims. Yet the president and Congress continue to saturate the Israeli military with billions of dollars of bombs and murderous machinery. You cannot simultaneously care about the welfare of the Palestinian people while sending 2,000-pound bombs to the Israeli military. When we see the epidemic of violence, the genocide in Palestine, we don't know all the solutions, but we do know that sending more bombs and more rockets is not the answer. Our future generations need a senator who will lead us away from this addiction to militarism. And you are the one who is best placed to speak out, to say enough is enough. We need a senator who will lead us away from fueling the genocide in Palestine. And you are the one that can do that. Now, specifically, we want you to speak out against the mass killing and forced migration of people, the starvation of children, the total destruction of the medical system. We want you to oppose any more military funding to Israel as long as they are acting as settler colonizers. We want you to call for the release of all uncharged prisoners in Israel's jails, just as you've called for the release of hostages held by Hamas. We want you to call for the removal of the illegal settlements in the West Bank and a restoration of law and order there. Taking the positions we advocate will be very risky for you, but I believe you became a politician because you care about human beings and humanity's future. You and I have really very little time left in this beautiful world. Please, let's look for ways to reduce the violence for the people of Israel and Palestine and for our grandchildren.
Thank you, Becky. Also, if you'll look in your agendas, there is a pathway to peace that we have put forward as a recommendation from the Appalachian Peace Education Center. In case we have time for questions with Kaine at the end, I think that you all have received some index cards. Hold them up, and Kathy in the corner and Dandy as well will go around and collect those cards so we can get as many comments and questions through as possible. Thank you, Senator Kaine, for taking the time to be with us today. The rest of the time is yours to respond or to answer questions as you choose. While we're looking forward to hearing what you say today, the real response that we're looking for is in your actions in the coming days. We're going to be watching very closely to see how you vote, what you say, and what you do. And we're hoping that you are going to join us on this pathway to peace and change the legacy of the Democratic Party and of America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to APEC and thank you to St. Thomas. I'm going to skip a lot of intro comments because I want to get right to it, but I do appreciate this opportunity. I've had sessions like this all over the Commonwealth, Northern Virginia, DC, obviously, but Richmond, where I live, Hampton Roads, Roanoke, Blacksburg, Stanton, Harrisonburg. But this is the first session that I've had sort of south of Blacksburg, and I'm really glad that we could do this today. And what I think I'll do is this. I would like to share with you what I believe are three tragedies, what I believe and what I'm trying to do. And if after that I have time for Q&A, I'd love to do it. But if I don't have time, we just obtained a big grant for the Appalachian Highlands Dental Center, and I'm going to do a visit there at 2 o'clock. So if I don't have time to take too many, I'll take all the questions, and then I will respond to them all and send it back to APEC. And then we can have, if you were, I don't know whether it's APEC visiting DC or Jewish Voices for Peace visiting DC, but if you want to come and dialogue further in DC, we can do that too. But again, thanks for this opportunity. Some of what I say, I think you'll agree with. Some you probably won't. Some might make you think. Certainly, as I was listening to you, I find much to agree with. Some I might look differently, but also much to think about. Three tragedies. Two promises were made to two people in 1948, 76 years ago, by the global community, that there would be a state of Israel and a state of Palestine living peacefully side by side. One promise has been met, one hasn't been met. Volumes have been written about whether the promise was the right promise to make, and volumes have been written about why both promises haven't been kept. But regardless of all of that, one promise has been kept and one promise hasn't been kept. And so that is a fundamental fact. Someone said this didn't start on October 7, and I think you have to begin by acknowledging the tragedy of two promises made to two people. One has been kept and one hasn't been. October 7 was a tragedy. October 7 was a tragedy in the obvious way, the loss of innocent life and the taking of hostages. Of course, atrocities of that kind are a tragedy, but October 7 was a tragedy for another important reason. Why was the attack on October 7? I'm on the Armed Services and the Foreign Relations Committees, and I work on these issues a lot. The Hamas attack of October 7 was designed and timed to disrupt a discussion that for the first time in probably 30 years seriously included what is a future for Palestinian autonomy. The discussion between the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia had at its center a discussion about a future for Palestinian autonomy to try to meet that promise made in 1948. Was it going to lead to a solution? Was it going to lead to an acceptable solution? We don't know. But Hamas attacked on that day to disrupt that discussion. Hamas does not want Israel and Palestine, two nations living peacefully side by side. And that was part of the reason for the attack. And so if anything can make the commission of violence against civilians and the taking of hostages worse, it was the reason that the attack occurred, which was to disrupt a discussion that included a future for Palestine. The third tragedy is the one that the speakers laid out so plainly: the needless loss of life of Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank before October 7, but especially since October 7. Loss of civilian life to bombing and military action, harming civilians because of inadequate delivery of humanitarian aid, hassling Palestinians on the West Bank who aren't Gaza, and not only violence committed against them, but violence committed against them by settlers escorted by IDF reservists or escorted by Israeli border officials. 3 tragedies. What do I believe? I believe 3 things, basically. Israel has a right to defend itself against those who would annihilate it, and I'll spend a minute on that. Palestinians have a right to live, and Palestinians have a right to a Palestinian future. Those are 3 fundamental beliefs that I have. On the Israel has a right to defend itself. And this is why it is hard for me to completely embrace no U.S. military aid to Israel. Look at the example of a few Saturdays ago with Iran launching missiles and drones in the hundreds against Israel. The United States helped defend Israel. Not only the U.S., but other nations too, and helped knock those drones and missiles down. 1 or 2 touched Israeli soil and didn't do a lot of damage, but we played a huge and important role in stopping significant bloodshed from the Iranian attack. And thank God we did, not just for Israel, because if we had not done that, and the Iranian missiles and drones had landed in significant numbers and people had been injured, I know what would have happened. Israel would have responded in an over-the-top way, just as they have since October 7, and then Iran would have responded in an over-the-top way. And the last thing the world needs is a massive and growing conflagration in the Middle East. So I do believe that the U.S. has an important role in helping Israel defend itself against those who would annihilate it. Hamas would annihilate it. Hezbollah would annihilate it. Iran would annihilate it. Iran invests in Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq who would annihilate it. Iran invests in the Houthis who would annihilate it. When there are those in the world who would annihilate Israel if they had the chance, I do believe there is a role for the United States to play in figuring out a way to help Israel defend itself. But Israel does not have a right to turn a defense against Hamas or a defense against those who would annihilate it into a all-purpose war against Gazans or Palestinians. All Gazans aren't Hamas. All Palestinians aren't Hamas. Hamas chooses techniques of battle embedding with civilian populations that can make this tricky, but you have to state the proposition up front. Palestinians have a right to live. Not all Palestinians are Hamas. And in my view, I think Israel has been doing a poor job of defending against Hamas without it being an all-purpose war against Gazans. And I gave this advice to the ambassador of Israel to the United States, Ambassador Herzog, after October 7, but before the Israelis began the war in Gaza. I gave him the advice. I said, learn from us. We're sadder but wiser. After the attack on 9/11, if we had just gone after al-Qaeda, the world would have understood and been with us. But we broadened the enemy to those who weren't the enemy. We made it a global war on terror. Why don't we go after Iraq too? And what did that get the United States? 20 plus years, thousands of deaths of U.S. troops and contractors, tens or hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths in the Middle East, destabilization of the region, trillions of dollars. To go after those who would annihilate you is one thing, especially when they've acted to do that, but to broaden it is wrong. And as you mentioned, it's counterproductive. It hurts your security. It makes things worse rather than makes them better. And before I get to what I want to do, the third thing I believe is Palestinians have a right to a future. There is only one thing in this whole tragedy that even has a seed of good within it. And I think those of us who are religious, or you don't have to be religious to see this, human life often shows us there's nothing so good that can't have a worm in it. And there's nothing so bad that can't have an inside in it. The only glimmer of something positive that's happening now is we are having a discussion about a future of Palestine that we've not had since the Oslo Accords. Remember the Oslo Accords? I mean, it had been a very long time before there was an agreement. There was normalization with Egypt, normalization with Jordan, but a long time before there had been agreement between Israel and then the Palestinian Authority. Like, yeah, two states living peacefully side by side. And as soon as that happened, right-wing extremists in Israel assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. And since that moment, the discussion about the future for Palestine, we paid lip service to it. And I mean, I'll plead guilty. In the US, we paid lip service to it. And Europe's paid lip service to it. And Arab nations have paid lip service to it. Palestinian leadership has paid lip service to it, not Palestinian people. The Israelis have, in many instances, not even paid lip service to it. Netanyahu doesn't want two states. But the discussion that's going on right now about a future for Palestinian autonomy that would meet the promise of 1948. And it might look different now than it looked in 1948 because a lot of history has happened since then, but we need to meet that promise or we're going to be right back here with APEC in this church basement in 5 years or 10 years. Or we're going to be back again and again and again. And so this third piece that's so important is we've got to stay at the table and find, with a coalition of nations and others, a future for Palestine that makes Palestinians believe that the promise that was made to them in 1948 is a promise that the world has kept. What am I trying to do? I have supported military aid to Israel and humanitarian aid to Gaza, Ukraine, and other areas, but to keep it focused, I have supported it. But beginning in February, watching what I view was a misuse of military aid by Israel, I have started to lean on the president in February and saying, look, draw a distinction between military aid that enables Israel to defend itself against those who would annihilate it, and military aid that has offensive capacities likely to escalate tensions, kill civilians, etc. Now, this is not a science, and you can argue about a particular military platform. Is it offensive or is it defensive? But there are some platforms that are really important to defense. Iron Dome and others that knock down the Iranian missiles and drones. Those are defensive platforms that I think are really helpful. And so I was alone when I did this in February. I mean, I couldn't even get any other senator to join me in this letter 2 months ago, urging President Biden, draw a distinction. If we've agreed to help Israel defend itself, draw a distinction and make it about defense. You saw last week, the president for the first time announced that he was withholding some military aid that he viewed as offensive in nature. I'm not yet satisfied with that because it's a little bit, that was the announcement last week, but then this week there might have been something that kind of undercut it. I think there's still a little bit of mixed messaging and frankly, lack of clarity, which probably means an internal tug of war within the administration about exactly what they're going to do. But you see what's happening. Even President Biden's claim that we're going to pause offensive weapons and move forward on defensive weapons only, that is producing a fairly furious response from every Republican and many Democrats in the House. That issue will come over to the Senate, and we will not reverse the president's decision on this. In fact, I think he needs to make it more clear that that's what he's doing. And then the second thing that I'm trying to do is what you all want to do, and I would, express it a little bit differently. It's ceasefire, but not just ceasefire. It's ceasefire and hostage release. I don't think at any point in time between October, well, certainly between middle of November and now, a full hostage release would have led to a ceasefire. Maybe not a permanent one, but of some duration. And when you're in it, you can extend it. I think the ceasefire has to accompany hostage release. And to the one of the demands, the hostage release only happens with the release of Palestinian prisoners. That's kind of the way this works. The ceasefire is one thing. The hostage release is a trade for the release of Palestinian political prisoners. And that's the way it's been, going back a ways from before October 7. And we fully understand it. That's what happened with the ceasefire in November, was hostages and Palestinian prisoners. And so that needs to happen. That's the first thing that needs to happen. And we've been tantalizingly close. And I have been saddened because there are weeks where I think Bibi Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire and hostage release. But then there's also been other weeks where I've wondered that Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire and hostage release. I'm not sure that I fully believe that either want a ceasefire hostage release, but all I can say now, because I can't say more than this without divulging stuff I can't, is that the differences between the sides in trying to reach ceasefire and hostage release are narrowing. We're not there yet. They're narrowing. If we can get the ceasefire and hostage release and the release of political prisoners, what does that get us? It gets us the ability to flood the zone with more humanitarian aid. Because President Biden has used something that we got put in law, this National Security Memorandum 20, to leverage the Israelis, more humanitarian aid is going in, but I still wouldn't give Israel a passing grade. Not when World Central Kitchen workers get killed. Not when UN aid workers get killed. Not when settlers on the West Bank attack aid convoys coming from Jordan to go into Gaza and throw everything off the truck and set the trucks on fire. I would have differed from the administration in their conclusion on the security memorandum when they said that Israel should get a passing grade on cooperating with U.S.-supported humanitarian efforts, because I don't think they yet get a passing grade on that. But if we can get ceasefire and hostage release, we will be able to put more humanitarian aid in. You will see a de-escalation of activity from Hezbollah and the militias and the Houthis. And then you will open up the discussion, both to extend and make permanent whatever the ceasefire is, but also to have this discussion about a Palestinian future. And again, if you don't do that, if we don't do that, and not just in a lip service way, but not just talk about it, but find a path forward to accomplish it, we're going to be right back here. That's basically what I would like to say. And then maybe if there are questions, I can take a few. I'm just looking here where I am. I can probably take about 10 minutes worth of questions before I head off to the dental clinic, but I will open it up. I'll take the questions back. I will respond to the group, to APEC, and then whether it's a Zoom session or a visit in DC or the next time I'm out, glad to do it, please.
Okay, hello, Senator. I'm Dandelion. I have some questions and comments for you. What happened to the red line on Rafah?
That's a good question. So I think the administration is grappling with the Israelis about what exactly the U.S. thinks is acceptable in Rafah and what isn't. They've said don't have this mass invasion of Rafah that will hurt civilians. What about targeted efforts to go after Hamas leadership in Rafah? I think the Biden administration would say they would accept that, but not a mass invasion. But whether or not Israelis have said that, they're listening to us, but they're not necessarily doing what we're saying. But I do think part of the president's announcement last week about defensive, and I'm going to hold an offensive, was because of concerns about Rafah.
Thank you for your response. Another question I have is there any progress using the new national security memorandum to hold Netanyahu to account?
There has been progress in the sense of the only reason Israel opened up the Erez crossing. So Kerem Shalom took way too long to open. You can't get supplies to Gazans just through the Egyptian crossing. It's not even really built for mass delivery of supplies. And so the only way to get enough humanitarian aid into Gaza is they open up the crossings from Israel. It took us way too long to get them to open Kerem Shalom in the south. And then it took way too long to get them to open Erez in the north. But the president used the National Security Memorandum to say, I have to tell Congress whether or not Israel is cooperating with our humanitarian goals. If you don't open that up, I'll have to say no. Now, I frankly think even that's grading on too low of a curve. I don't think opening up Erez is enough. Again, if you look at the strikes against World Central Kitchen, what's going on with these West Bank settlers throwing stuff off trucks and setting them on fire, I don't believe the Biden administration should have given a passing grade on humanitarian aid. And together with some Senate colleagues, we are strategizing about what we can do to lean more forward on the administration.
Leaning more forward on the administration. I have a comment that I'd like to read to you. Oop, I lost it. All right. Our children are not willing to vote for Biden due to the support of Israel with continued military help. What do you say to our young people, especially my children who are strong Democrats and still feel this way?
The only thing I want to say about politics is this is so much bigger than politics that I don't like talking about politics. I mean, it's so much bigger than politics. If someone says to me, you know, I don't like what the Democratic Party is doing, I say to them, this is a global human rights issue. It's so much bigger than politics that I'd rather not talk about politics. Now, and I don't know that I can convince anyone to look at this different than they look at it. I mean, it's a tragedy, and people are going to look at it the way that they look at it. And I would not presume to convince anyone, well, you should feel differently about it. No, you should feel exactly the way you're feeling. Now, what I sometimes say when I'm asked a question like that is, if you look at President Biden and you look at former President Trump, and you say both of them probably flunked the Gaza-Palestinian test, then I think the next question is that the only issue? Remember, one president's first action was a Muslim travel ban. And one president will fight against that tooth and nail to his last breath. I mean, I remember because I have a constituent service office, Laura Blevins, who runs my offices here. When that Muslim travel ban hit within 10 days after President Trump became president, our office was flooded with, my mom is in Jordan and can't come here. I'm a student who is a grad student teacher at Virginia Tech, but I went home for the holidays and now I can't come back. It took us 2 years to work through the constituent challenges of a Muslim travel ban. And anybody who thinks that won't happen again wasn't paying attention the first time. So I would not try to convince someone. If you give me, Biden, anybody, a failing grade on this, I'm sure you probably give the other side a failing grade on this. And you just have to decide, are there other issues that matter to you? Are there other issues that matter to Muslim Americans? Are there other issues that matter to folks who care deeply about human rights? And maybe the balance convinces you to go one way, or maybe the balance convinces you to go another way. But it would be presumptuous of me to tell you how you should feel about this. You should feel about it exactly the way you feel about it. It's so serious.
Do you have time for 2 more
Yes.
questions? Okay, wonderful. To your earlier statements, why was there no Palestinian leadership involved in those talks that you mentioned?
Yeah, no, very, very good question. Why was there no Palestinian leadership involved? And you're talking about the talks between Israel, the Saudis, and the U.S.
I believe so,
Yeah.
yes.
Remember, during the Trump administration, there was this peace plan announced, and there was zero Palestinian involvement in that. Clearly, there is not going to be a solution for a Palestinian autonomy or future that's just, here's your solution, take it or leave it. That's not going to be the solution. I don't think the discussions were at a gel point yet, where it was like, okay, here's what we're talking about. What do you think about this? I'll tell you what I think, just personally, and I've said this to Netanyahu to his face about 7 or 8 years ago, and he told me I was dreaming, but the Arab League put a peace proposal on the table in 2003, and Israel just turned their nose up at it. Never took it seriously. I said to Bibi Netanyahu, probably the last time I was in his office was about 2015, I said, okay, you never took that seriously, but it wouldn't be a bad time to say, even if we don't agree with all of this, we now view it was an offer made in good faith and a starting point to have real dialogue about a Palestinian future. And that way you're recognizing the reality that there's not going to be a solution here without not just Palestinian acceptance, but also neighbors willing to invest and support as well. And so I think the idea was to get to a place of, some conceptual framework, and then, come to the PA and others, Palestinians, and say, how about this as a starting point for discussion? The discussions weren't at that place, but I will say the one thing, I've got my own deep concerns about the Saudis, but they have 2 conditions to these discussions, which are still ongoing. Number one, there has to be an agreed upon future for Palestinians that Palestinians accept. And two, the war in Gaza has to be over. The Saudis are not going to do a normalization deal with the U.S. and Israel unless those two criteria are met. And I hope they stick, as long as they stick to those two criteria, which are the right criteria, then we can still keep talking and trying to find a path.
So Israel bombed Iran's embassy in Damascus before Iran retaliated. Where do you see that fitting into the entire story of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
So it definitely fits into this back and forth. It fits into the back and forth between Israel and Iran. Israel has been taking actions against Iranian, folks connected to the Iranian nuclear program. And Iran is backing militias in Iraq and Syria, and also Hezbollah and the Houthis that are taking, firing missiles from the Houthis into Israel. And so this is the Iran-Israel back and forth is a very significant one. The thing about the, the thing about the Iranian attack on Israel that followed that attack on the consulate that was different is it was Iran trying to hit Israel from Iranian soil, and then Israel going after Iran from Israeli soil. And that not that it was completely without precedent, but that's the kind of thing that dramatically raises the stakes. And the fact that we were able, with U.S. troops on carriers in the Eastern Med and others, to help Israel knock down the Iranian drones and missiles, again, it not only saved bloodshed in Israel, but it enabled us to say to Israel, hey, we helped you defend yourself. If you think you need to prove you can touch Iranian soil from Israel, just like they did, just make it limited. If we had not helped Israel, and that would have been a successful attack, Israel would have done in Iran just what they're doing in Gaza. It would have been massive and over the top and an escalation that nobody in the world needs. So it did play a role, obviously. They've been going back and forth for a very long time. But the good news is, in the aftermath of that kind of pinpoint Israeli strike into Iran, both Iran and Israel for now, have at least taken somewhat of a step back, which is good for everyone. Let me just say thank you. I'm going to go to the Appalachian Highlands Dental Clinic, but let's, as was said, I think Molly said, hey, we have 45 minutes or a little bit longer, but let's just call this the beginning of a conversation. And if you want to follow up by Zoom, or if you're in DC, or if you want to, wait till I'm next out and we can talk more. And look, God willing, by the time I'm next out, we might be in that ceasefire hostage release that we are extending to do humanitarian aid and find a path forward to do exactly what I think we're all praying for the same thing. We might have some different ideas about how to get there, but I believe we're all praying for the same thing. Yeah, please. And for the ones that were not asked, I'll take these and I'll just try to respond back to APEC, and then maybe you guys can share them.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to take a moment of silence as we conclude to reflect on everything we've heard today and the violence that's being experienced in Palestine, and also what our actions and what possibilities we have to do to pursue the pathway for peace. Thank you. Moment of silence, yeah. Thank you all. For everyone that has time, we have some refreshments in the back. Please stay for conversation and discussion.